Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to something I'm really excited about. The dates and location for the Colorado Health and PE Council Summit are set for June 3rd and 4th at Hinckley High School in Aurora, Colorado. This is a free professional learning opportunity designed specifically for K-12 health and physical education teachers. What makes this conference special is that every session is grounded in best practices in health and physical education and intentionally models effective instructional strategies. Sessions will focus on topics like standards-based activities, assessment, curricular resources, inclusion, student voice, and teacher growth. You'll find both classroom-based and activity-based sessions, but you won't be sitting silently through lectures or just playing games with no connection to teaching and learning. This conference is designed to give you ideas and strategies that actually make it back into your classroom and elevate the experience your students have every day. Another thing that sets this conference apart is how we support our presenters. If your session is accepted, you'll receive feedback, guidance, and an invitation to a virtual facilitator prep session so you feel confident and prepared to lead meaningful learning. If you're interested in presenting, submissions are open now with a deadline of March 15th, 2026. You'll find the submission form linked in the show notes. And if you're planning to attend, save the dates and spread the word. Registration will be open soon. We hope to see you there. My guest today is Christopher Kolb. Chris earned his Bachelor of Science in Physical Education from Queens College and his Master's at Brooklyn College. He has been teaching for 16 years, spanning both general and special education PE. His experience includes 10 years with the New York City Department of Education in special education and 6 years in general education PE, working primarily with K-8 students. Chris also serves as a part-time college professor at Queens College, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate PE majors, helping to prepare the next generation of PE teachers through hands-on coursework and school-based experience. And now I bring you Chris Kolb. Chris, welcome.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to spend some time to get down to today's topic.
Today, we're going to talk about how you build trust with your students, some specific cues that you give students that align with your behavior expectations. I'm really excited to hear your strategies for how you prevent power struggles with some of our most challenging students as well. So let's start off, Chris, with the way that teachers communicate, whether it's verbal cues, tone, body language. Why are these so important in a PE setting, especially when it comes to building trust and managing student behavior?
I think, the moment students step into the gymnasium, their eyes are on us. I mean, if it's not the equipment, it's us. And they're watching our every move. And I think that as young kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, they are really paying attention to how we are talking, how close or how far we're standing away from them, how excited we are to be with them, whether we have a straight face or a face with a smile, a stern voice or a very happy voice. And I think those things matter the most when it comes to especially elementary school. The goal is to lead the class through a sequence of tasks, often individual and skill practice, and sometimes in small groups, which is why those verbal cues, tone, and body language count so much. For example, something that I stress in the coursework at the college, which is Queens College, is a teacher's proximity, their eye contact, ability to meet, greet, and use names, and excite children when it serves the lesson best. I think those things really do matter.
Students who are excited to be in the gym are going to be on task, engaged, they're going to be active. Do you find that when students are anticipating going to physical education class that the teacher has to deal less with off-task or disruptive behaviors?
I think that children are generally excited to come into the gymnasium, generally speaking, which means it's a time for them to talk a little bit more, get a little closer to their friends, be a part of small groups. We look for those students all the time to set the tone, but there's another side of it, right? There's those students who aren't excited. And so I think that's where our presence, our cues, our body language, and the words that we use, whether it's a certain vocabulary or inviting them into our space, really does matter as well.
Let's talk a little bit about those words that you use and some verbal cues that play into day-to-day teaching for effective PE teachers. Can you give an example of how a phrase or a cue has helped you guide student behavior or redirect student behavior with minimal conflict?
Sure. So, those are essential strategies. We fall back on those cues. We fall back on those phrases because that's how we round up the troops. I have two examples. A loud class doesn't need an exciting Mr. Kolb. They need someone who's a little bit confident, calm voice. They don't need the loud hellos the moment they walk into that gym. And so you have to consider that they might get overstimulated. They might not need that person in the moment. I think that in the middle of the lesson, that serves a lot more, right? Especially when you want to emphasize key aspects of your lesson to really tie things into your objectives. And I would advise teachers out there sometimes, when appropriate, to skip the loud hello and start the day or that lesson with a little less is more mentality.
Can you be a little bit more specific? Give like a real world example of what it might sound like for a teacher who greets their students at the door and is not trying to overstimulate students. I really appreciate this approach that you're taking with bringing students into a safe and calm and organized environment. What might be the differences between someone who starts off their class in like this loud and overstimulating environment versus what it looks or sounds like to greet your students and be exactly how you're describing?
I would say if you want to start that class off calm and confident, meeting them at the door in a very poised stance, kind of maybe with your hands behind your back, peering into their eyes in the front of the line, in the middle of the line, and at the end of the line, and just throwing out a nice compliment. Either it's so nice to see you today, or I'm looking at such a great line, and I need that great line to walk into my gym straight to your big spaces. And so when the music starts, you can get ready and you could show me that you're ready.
So you start out with a compliment, positively reinforcing the things that students are doing well when they show up at the doors of the gym. And then you're very specific about how you want them to enter the gym. So it's not just come in and start sprinting around our space. It's I need to see you walk to your spots, be at a voice level 0, and be ready for our first activity, or however it is that you would actually communicate that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that works pretty nicely. And that also pertains to our body language. Like, for example, what if our movements are just slower than normal, right? Because we don't want to overexcite, meaning follow me into the gym nice and slowly, and I think there's a little bit of a different tone there because generally speaking, the gym is associated with activities during the day, such as recess or a loud environment. So what if you disassociate that at the beginning of your class? You might end up being more successful. Furthermore, the compliment at the beginning helps them to get ready to be more receptive to your instruction.
I think that some teachers think that when kids get to the gym, when they line up at the gym doors, that it's their job to create that stimulating environment. And I really appreciate what you're saying about keeping things nice and calm and getting students ready to enter the gym and begin class in an organized way. Let's go back to some of the verbal cues that you recommend that teachers use. What are some ones that are impactful that are going to have a positive influence on student behavior?
So I think some verbal cues that work really well are ones that connect with the child through rhythm. There's that special inflection in our voice or there's a rhyme to the words. And that works really well with the elementary school level. I could use a jumping activity, right? I noticed when it was difficult to jump off that platform onto the mat, you still landed with 2 feet in a tucked position. Nice work. And so, the child getting that praise using that vocabulary and obviously the cues to execute a proper jump with 2 feet on the takeoff and the land, and incorporating a little bit more complexity with that tuck, you end up praising their perseverance. And so I follow that up with something really powerful, which is, wow, you're pretty strong. And if you have your class just right, because you are the seasoned teacher that you are, you put some echo backs at the beginning of your lesson, which is a play on words here where I use I, you, and we. And so I can finish it off with, wow, you're so strong. I'm strong. Boys and girls, we are strong. And so the whole class kind of chimes in and I say, hey, everyone, who is strong? And all the students just go, I am. So here you are individually praising a student, but now the whole class is backing that student that you just praised.
That lends itself towards such an inclusive and positive culture that you're building in your gym. It's not just about getting every student's attention and then having them focus on you. It's also building towards that culture that you try to maintain throughout the course of the year.
I do want to go back though, just to touch on the opposite of that confidence and calmness to your voice. In contrast, would be the teacher who overexcites their student. I think sometimes that's so appropriate. You come across, though, some students who are naturally too excited in your class, almost to the point where you dive into that activity or that group activity of locomotor skills where you finally get to that section of where they're going to run around the gym and you say to yourself, oh no, where am I going with this? How are those students going to react? And it's those students who don't need that loud hello at the beginning of the class because midway through they're going to be excited using their own adrenaline and the fact that they're so happy that they're not in such a structured environment that traditionally they're locked into all day, 7, 8 periods a day.
You mentioned some of these cues that you use throughout the course of a year. How do you introduce those cues and reinforce them so that they become a part of the routines and the rituals of the class so that students respond to them consistently?
When you introduce and reinforce those cues, it's important to be consistent. You're just getting them used to some type of routine that works and something that they're incredibly familiar with over time. Generally, you're not going to change your instructional style. You might modify your activities more than your instructional style. You might come across classes that work a little bit better in stations than in a direct style approach. But generally, I think they should be embedded in your regular communication from the start. You have to be very consistent and very intentional with those things. If you want them to respond consistently, you have to be intentional with your vocabulary too. That will end up aiding in your identification and explanation of a physical skill. Again, going back to your question, how do you introduce and reinforce those cues? Focus on those CLOs, and you bring those up really nicely in your book. Something that's opened my eyes to how I speak to my students. It sure has had an influence on me. When you're in the planning stage, and I do stress this at the college level too, when they're in my class and we're really into the thick of elementary methods, where in your lesson do you want to promote socialization or expression of emotions? When do you want to promote it? When do you want to model it? And what are some exciting words to promote and support accomplishment? You can go back to the traditional ones. Wow, you did it. You can go back to, wow, we're making a pretty good team today. I think those are supportive and inclusive. Here's a guide I like to use. Use expressive language and choose it wisely. When you use expressive language, exaggerate moments when you're excited. What if a student makes a mistake and they get too close to you? You kind of back away and go, whoa, too close, slow down. Let's make some space. And, right there, I think that's expressive language. I think it's appropriate. I'm pairing it with body language.
Just a quick pause to share that if you're looking for professional learning that connects to your day-to-day teaching, we now offer 5 self-paced graduate-level courses designed specifically for PE teachers. They can be used toward a master's, salary advancement, or teaching license renewal. Details are in the show notes. You mentioned CLOs, content and language objectives, and it's something that you and I have chatted a little bit about in our messages back and forth to each other. For anyone who's interested in that, the episode that I did with my colleague Jen Smith, I believe, was episode number 8 on CLOs. I would love to actually hear how you've been implementing them because they're unique to Denver Public Schools. Have you tried to implement content and language objectives in some of your classes? What have you noticed, whether it's changes in your teaching or changes in student learning as a result of implementing not just content that comes from the standard, but also opportunities for students to be able to articulate their learning as well?
It's gotten me to a point where I'm just paying attention to it a little bit more. And I think that's where it starts when you're experimenting, right? You're not implementing yet, you're experimenting. So you're just rolling around the idea in your head. And what I've been able to do with that is the moment I heard that term, I started unpacking the standards. I started totally unpacking the standards. And it started with a little bit of lesson planning work at the college level. And so I'd bring up the national and state standards. I'd go down the list, K to 2, and I'd start with psychomotor because that's the most easily digestible standard to start with. So far, that's what CLOs have done for me.
What is it about content and language objectives that you think is impactful for students? Like, why would a teacher consider including opportunities in their lessons for students to articulate their learning? Why not just demonstrate these things physically?
Students have perceived challenges, or we perceive students having various challenges. So I think when you focus on vocabulary, focus on that content language objective, essentially you're giving the students a chance to figure out how they want to put all those words together. And that's the ultimate check for understanding, right? We can assess their skills, but if they can't explain it to us, then ultimately we just have a bunch of kids in our gym saying, do it like this. When we focus on the vocabulary in our lessons, we give them new words to kind of put into their bank. And we give them an opportunity to either recall it and give it back to us or answer a question, which is really where you want to end up getting to. They can recall, they can repeat it. Now, if I ask them a question, do they understand? If I pair that question with movement, will they understand more?
I also like to connect CLOs to the reputation of a physical education program, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. In an average PE program anywhere across the country, I think what a principal or a classroom teacher who picks their kids up after PE expects to hear students say is that they played a game today. So if they say, hey, what did you learn in PE? The student might say, oh, we played soccer today. They might take it one level further and they might say something like, we learned how to dribble a soccer ball today. They might be able to say that to their teacher. But what I don't think most students can say is what you're talking about here, being able to describe something, describe a physical cue, or compare and contrast dribbling a soccer ball to dribbling a basketball. I wonder what your thoughts are on what the impact of having standards-based content and language objectives is on the reputation of a PE program.
I think if you have a good understanding of that component, I think that you have a good platform to stand on. When you're having a general conversation with a colleague or a principal, you're able to express that although they're physically moving throughout the 45 minutes or so in the gymnasium, they can put these things together and they have a pretty good handle on not only how to work on a skill, but how to interact with a partner, how to keep spatial awareness. And so getting back to your original point of what that does for our reputation, I think that it makes it just as important that this is truly instructional time. You know, you have a beginning and a middle and an end to your planned lesson. We'll always be stuck in that box of how can we legitimize our profession just a little bit more? And I think that's something we've learned the moment we stepped into a college when we knew that this was exactly what we wanted to do.
I think that making colleagues realize that the gym is also an instructional space helps legitimize what PE teachers do every single day. It's not just the place where students are going to be red and sweaty by the end of class. We sure do hope that that happens because we know that students don't get nearly enough physical activity throughout their day. So the gym and PE class is a place where some of that is going to happen. It's also really important to legitimize the discipline and to distinguish it from other programs like organized recess. I don't know how things are in New York these days, but here in Denver over the last several years, we've had a couple of principals decide to cut back on their PE programs and hire like recess coordinators. And I think that that happens because a principal sees chaos in the gym, they see disorganization, they might see students getting injured, and they don't see standards-based instructional methods happening or students able to articulate what they're actually learning. So I feel like not only is it good for the reputation of physical education, it's also good job security to be able to prove that you're not just here keeping students safe, making them sweat for 45 minutes. You're also here teaching them standards-based concepts that they're going to be able to articulate to their teacher, to the principal, to your evaluator, whoever comes in and observes you, to their parents when they get home. I just really think that that is the ultimate benefit from having content and language objectives in your PE program.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're always looking for someone to be in our corner, in our school. It's nice when you get along with another teacher and they give you a compliment about what they're viewing, or they're passing by and they get to just take a look into what you're doing. Today, I had a section of the gym that is a little bit more undesirable because I do share a gym space with a wonderful colleague, by the way. And so, we organize and we split up the gym. Sometimes we flip flop back and forth. And I was in a section that totally changes up my game plan, right? PE looks different in every setting based off of your equipment, based off of the number of students, your facility. And so we were working on leaping today. And leaping is just an extension of running. We know that, except they have to forcefully push off of one foot just a little bit more to get some height and some length to their stride. But what I want to get to is the example of those, going back to those CLOs. I told the students today, I said, halfway through, I said, what are we working on again? And the student said leaping. And when we are using the hurdles for leaping, we're running across in a straight line, looking forward, shaking our shoulders, bending our elbows, moving our feet, and pushing off of one foot and landing on the opposite.
This sounds like a really fun lesson on a locomotor movement that we know is obviously part of our standards and integral to students being confident movers. Would you be open to collaborating together on creating a content and language objective for this lesson that you did on leaping today?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea as long as you take the lead, but I'm going to co-teach on this one.
All right, that sounds like a good plan. All right, so as you know, because we've talked a little bit about CLOs and the process for making them before, one of the first things that you have to do when you're creating a content and language objective is to think about the ideal student response. That's what I like to call it. So when someone asks their student, what did you learn in PE today? We have to come up with what we want students to say. So can you remind me what grade levels were you teaching leaping today? Early elementary, right?
Correct.
Can you think of anything that you would want students to be able to articulate about leaping? And I can give you some examples if you like. But if someone asked, what did you learn in PE today? What would you want students to say about the skill of leaping?
Leaping is an extension of running. It could help us improve our stride. It could help us possibly go faster. You can also end up linking it to, this is a great form of exercise to challenge our heart and our lungs.
So there's a couple of different ways we can go with it if we want. We can go into fitness components. So we could make this lesson on cardiovascular endurance. When you brought up another skill, which was running, you made me think of having students compare running and leaping. So in that case, students would be saying something like, leaping is similar to running because blank. Leaping is different than running because blank. Does that sound like something that would match what you want students to take away from this lesson? And again, we're adding an extension off of the physical demonstration of the skill. So I'll say it to you all in one shot, and you can give me an approval if you like this one and you want to continue with this example, or if you want to scrap it and change something else. It might sound something like, I can physically demonstrate how to leap, and I can compare leaping with running. As long as we're assuming that running was a skill that you taught them, a couple days ago. They're familiar with the other skill. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, you brought up, I think, an excellent example, a very good example, in fact, textbook. But my mind is going in so many directions because if you take the skill of leaping and break it down as well, the student is processing an object that is far away. There's depth perception going on, and they are approaching this stationary object really quickly. Now, prior to this, you were telling them to avoid obstacles by going around them. right? So we're not going around them, we're going over them. I guess maybe that's also another direction I'm going in is they're approaching a stationary object and using leaping as a skill to go over that object. And so they're timing their jump off of one foot or their takeoff off of one foot to help avoid that obstacle. We can go in your direction, which I think is totally textbook. And then again, now the student is approaching a stationary object and must not go around, but over that object safely and land safely and continue their momentum forward, timing their leap for the next hurdle.
Well, I think what you brought up is a great example and a reminder for teachers that there's not just one way to write an objective for any particular standard or skill. When it comes to a locomotor skill like leaping, you could have students describe how to do it. You could have them compare leaping to a different locomotor skill. One lesson that I see often is comparing the difference between skipping and galloping. You could scrap the whole bit about leaping and you could use a lesson like this to teach levels to students, like you mentioned. So if you want levels to be the key takeaway, students being able to travel over an object or under an object or around an object, you could use leaping as a means to teach students that. The biggest part is that, number one, you, the teacher, chooses which is the most important thing for your students to take away. And then number two, you don't make the same mistake that I made a long time ago in my first few years of teaching, which was you plan a really cool lesson with fun activities, and then you just throw like 3 standards on the top of your lesson plan and you say, yeah, I'm teaching students these 3 things. And you're never really intentional about communicating just one thing. So that's what I would say, is to just pick the one thing that you think is most important. What do you think your students need the most? And then we'll continue with our example and maybe come up with a couple of questions to get students to both do, physically demonstrate, and to articulate these things as well.
Yeah, I like the levels. I like that because, again, you were saying earlier, you can go over an object, you can go under an object or around an object. And I think those are good words to play on too.
That sounds great. This will be a great example. So there's a couple different places we can go next, because now we know exactly which standard we want to focus on today, and that's levels. So when a parent asks their student, what did you learn in PE today? What is it that you want them to say about what they learned about levels?
We actually learned about high levels today. And instead of going around obstacles, we went over them. That was pretty cool. You should have seen me. I went so high because I pushed off that foot. I think a young student could connect it to an animal. So I feel like they could connect it to an athlete. I feel like a football player running down the field, and I have those lines in front of me, but then I have a player and I have to watch out. I think that's what it feels like. I think what it feels like is I stayed in that air a long time. Or they might feel a sense of like power. A student would be like, you see, it was my sneakers. And I'm like, no, you actually timed that pretty well. And I wish that hurdle was a little bit higher because you would have flew over that obstacle pretty well.
I think that those are great ideal student responses. So they might respond by saying something like, when I leap, it looks like I am traveling over something. Maybe like a football player leaping over someone who's trying to tackle me. Or when I leap over something, it feels like I'm gliding in the air and the object is underneath me, right? Something like that seems appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to write your CLO/I can statement, because you use I can statements at your school. So this I can statement might sound something like, I can physically demonstrate and verbally describe how to leap over objects using words like looks like or feels like. I know that's not student-friendly language, but that might be what we would put like in a lesson plan. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I like that. Let's go with it.
Let's run with it. All right. So then the next thing that we want to do is think about how we can actually communicate that to students in a student-friendly way. One of my favorite ways to communicate objectives that I like to talk about, and I get laughed at a lot by my friend Jen, is to communicate objectives in the form of a story. We could create a 5-sentence story together if you want tonight, or we could think about some other ways that you might clearly communicate to students that today they're going to be able to leap over objects and they're going to be able to describe what leaping looks and feels like. How do you want to communicate this objective to, let's say, your first graders?
See, I like the storytelling. I think that you took that to a place that we forget to do sometimes because, we have to play on that imagination. But if you're not comfortable with that, I think we're going back to that body language, tone, and those cues. You're making that activity or that task sound really cool.
If you were going to create a story to communicate to students that they're going to be leaping over things and describing what that's like, do you want to use a football example maybe to create a story, or you mentioned animals earlier?
Let's go with the animals. Let's go with something that gets a student to use their imagination.
I had an idea. I have a couple cats. I'm wondering if we could create a story based on me seeing my cat leap. Maybe a cat might not be leaping exactly, but we could present the story to students. What is an animal that leaps? Do we have one that we could do a better?
Yeah, I think like possibly, like if you want to get into leaping, you can go with, something like a gazelle or something. Or I would say no, I like the cat idea because you could see it. You could see a cat jump and leap, so to speak, right?
I think so, yeah.
No, let's go with that story.
All
I think
right.
you can excite students with that. I think you can keep their interest, but I like the story with the animal, and it's a relatable animal. It's something that they have in their house, right?
For sure. Yeah, not too many pet gazelles out there.
No.
All right, so let's run with that example. So what if and we're just making this up, so it's probably not going to sound all that polished. We might say something like, so I was playing with my cat over the weekend, and I noticed that my cat would run up to his toy and then leap over it. And I thought that it would be really cool to teach my first graders how to leap over different objects. So in PE today, I'm going to teach you how to leap. It's similar to running, but it's a little bit different than just jumping in place. So I'm going to teach you how to leap today. The other thing that I want you all to be able to do by the end of class is to tell me what leaping looks like or what leaping feels like. What do you think it feels like to be a cat who runs as fast as he can and then leaps over his favorite toy or leaps over the coffee table, however you want to make up the story? Do you think that if you told a simple story like that, took less than a minute, do you think that students would fully understand what it is that you want to teach them today and what you want them to be able to accomplish by the end of the lesson? Because that's the main goal of communicating an objective. It's that the teacher sends a message to students and then students understand what they're working on for that lesson.
I think they would understand. I think that in most cases, you might have to start that conversation off and just use a descriptive word just to get their mind going in the direction you want them to. So after telling that story, you might say something like, if I saw that cat leap, or when I saw that cat leap, I noticed they were pretty strong. What else do you think that cat felt like?
The last thing that a teacher really needs to do in order to plan a lesson that aligns back to a CLO is to come up with a couple of questions that they're going to ask students in order to get them to do the thing that the CLO is asking them to do, which in this case is describing what leaping over an object looks or feels like. So we know that one question is going to be, can you show me what leaping over an object looks like? Students are going to reply to that with a physical demonstration. That part's the easy part. Every PE teacher knows how to do that. What questions or prompts might you give to students as they're engaged in the game and you're walking around the gym in order to get them to pause for just a moment and to describe what leaping over an object looks or feels like? Remember, we want students to respond to whatever it is that we're saying to them with, when I leap over an object, it looks like this, or when I leap over an object, it feels like this. What would you say as the teacher in order to get them to respond that way?
I think the last time we were moving around the gym, boys and girls, we were pretending we were animals. So, can you think of three animals that you possibly feel like when you are going over those hurdles?
I like that one. So students are going to say, when I leap over a hurdle, I feel like a blank, and they'll share an animal. So that's a great example of how a teacher can get students to say what it feels like to leap over something. If you wanted to have students simply share what it looks like to leap over an object, you could be very, very straightforward. We don't have to overthink it. It could just be like, can you describe for me what it looks like to leap over that hurdle? I saw you do it, but can you describe for me what it looks like? And then students are going to respond with, when I leap over the hurdle, it looks like I'm traveling on top of it, right? Or it looks like the object is underneath me. So I think we got it. Those are the questions that you would want to ask students. What does it feel like, or what type of animal does it feel like to leap over something? I think that's a really fun question for young students. And describe what it looks like when you leap over an object. I think we did it.
Yeah, I think so. Putting our great minds together on that one. Yeah, the CLOs are pretty complex concepts
Yeah.
that you want to, I think, get right from the beginning, and it actually takes a little bit of time to digest it and figure out how you want those students to articulate those answers.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there's something that teachers just need to experiment with and see how they work in their classes and how they would communicate them to their students. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate your time, and thanks for doing this.
Gary, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much.